Welcome back. If you want history told through data maps and eyewitness accounts, you're in the right place. January 1876 Northern Plains. Snow hardens the ridgelines above Powder River Tongue River and Rosebud Creek, and United States commanders issue winter orders to compel all non-agency Lakota and Northern Cheyenne to report. 3 columns take shape. Crook marches north from Fort Fetterman toward Goose Creek and the Rosebud. Gibbon patrols along the Yellowstone and the Lower Bighorn. Terry organizes a drive from the east with 7th Cavalry as his mobile arm. Inside the non-treaty camps, Oglala leader Crazy Horse works beside Allied headmen to move lodges fast, protect horse herds, and wait for ground that favors mounted counterstroke. The principal actors are clear by name and purpose: Crazy Horse and Allied Lakota and Northern Cheyenne circles seeking to preserve autonomy by maneuver, and Crook Gibbon Terry with attached regiments seeking to fix and compel by converging routes. The central question for this episode is military and specific. Between June 1876 and January 7, by what method did Crazy Horse and Allied riders close the soldiers' roads of escape at Rosebud Creek and along the Little Bighorn bluffs, and how did the same leader then try to keep one northern road open for his own people under winter pursuit to Wolf Mountain? The significance lies in the pairing of tactics and logistics on open ground. Control of exits on broken prairie decides whether a column can disengage or whether a village can survive the season. We will follow dates, places, and orders of march, measure the effect of flanking pressure and ridge control, and test claims against reports from both sides. The aim is to show how terrain read in motion became a weapon, and why that skill mattered when the weather and supply curve turned against the camps. Spring 1874. Black Hills. The Custer expedition confirms gold traces in the Black Hills, a region reserved to the Lakota by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. News spreads along the Missouri River steamboats and Eastern papers. Prospectors and freight outfits move toward the hills despite the treaty. Through 1874 and 1875, federal officials attempt to manage a contradiction they cannot hold. Miners enter a closed district while Indian Affairs remains responsible for treaty protection. The result is pressure at every agency and along every trail that touches the Yellowstone and Powder River country. Autumn 1875, Washington. A commission proposes to purchase the Black Hills and relocate hunting bands to permanent agency life. Many Lakota leaders reject the sale. By November, the executive branch signals a hard line. The order that follows sets a clear date. All non-agency Lakota must report by January 31, 1876, or be treated as hostile. The date is a winter date when deep cold and long moves punish pony herds and families. This sets the proximate cause of the campaign. When the deadline passes, the Army is tasked to compel compliance. January to March 1876. Northern Plains. The ultimatum expires. Department commanders begin assembling converging columns. George Crook organizes from Fort Fetterman toward Goose Creek and the Rosebud Valleys. John Gibbon aligns forces along the Yellowstone to block movement north and west. Alfred Terry forms a field command with the 7th Cavalry for a later push from the lower Yellowstone. Telegraph lines carry orders that assume the plains can be partitioned and searched. In practice, snowmelt will govern rivers and grass length will govern horses. Longer causes run under these dates. For a decade, surveyors have run lines toward the Yellowstone for the Northern Pacific Railroad. In 1873, armed reconnaissance and skirmishes near the Yellowstone crossings teach both sides that a small mounted force can harass and delay a column tied to wagons. The buffalo decline accelerates through the early 1870s, narrowing the hunting range for non-agency bands and forcing wider seasonal swings to find herds. Agency systems created to distribute rations and annuities strain under corruption, delay, and contested leadership. These frictions push a portion of Oglala, Miniconjou, Sans Arc, and Hunkpapa to remain away from agencies and keep winter and spring camps along Tongue River and Rosebud Creek, where mobility preserves independence. Policy structure matters. Since 1849, Indian Affairs has been housed in the Department of the Interior, but when the January 6 deadline lapses, the War Department becomes the instrument of enforcement. This split of policy and force creates a clean chain of military order, with an unclear path to a political settlement. On the ground, agency agents issue counts and ration notices, while Army officers prepare campaign returns and requisitions for ammunition and forage. The signals to the camps are mixed: come in for rations and safety or face converging columns. The choice is not only political, it is logistical. Objectives clarify by side. The United States objective is to compel non-agency bands to the agency secure the Black Hills region for miners and federal control and break the capacity of mobile village societies to cross the theater at will. Constraints include distance from railheads, slow wagon trains over broken country, limited scouting intelligence, and the need to keep cavalry mounts fit through long marches. Crook and later Terrybout will depend on depots along the Platte and Yellowstone, and on mule trains that must be guarded. Ammunition supply for infantry is strong. Carbine ammunition for cavalry can run tight after forced rides unless resupply meets the column. For the Allied Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, the objective is to preserve autonomy of movement, defend the hunting base, and avoid being fixed in place where artillery and infantry weight can decide a battle. Constraints are the winter condition of families and herds, finite stocks of powder and lead, and the risk that a deep winter fight can cost the next season's mobility. Logistics are carried on 4 legs. Meat hides and household goods move with the pony herds. Spare ammunition is limited and must be used at decisive range. Scouts bring news of columns days in advance by reading dust trail and river fords. Command is distributed through circles of leaders who gather at councils and separate again to protect families when pressure rises. Immediate triggers fall in sequence. The purchase plan of autumn 1875 fails. The January 31, 1876 order expires. Early March sees Reynolds strike a Cheyenne village on Powder River and lose captured ponies in the retreat, a sign that overextension can turn a temporary success into a mobility loss. Through April and May, non-treaty camps consolidate along Tongue River and Rosebud Creek to watch Crook's northward movement. Couriers ride between Allied lodges and Oglala leadership under Crazy Horse, who favors using ground and speed to control the soldiers' direction, rather than standing to trade volleys at long range. By early June, the campaign logic is set. The Army will try to find and fix. The Allied camps will try to stretch and flank. Rivers swollen with melt will define where wagons can cross. Ridges and coulees will define where horses can appear. The deeper cause remains the same pressure that reached from Washington to the Black Hills to the Yellowstone. A treaty boundary breached by gold, a policy that tried to convert mobile hunters into ration clients, and a winter deadline that turned movement itself into a test of sovereignty. March 17, 1876, Powder River Country. Before dawn in deep cold, a United States detachment under Joseph Reynolds strikes a Northern Cheyenne winter village on the west fork of Powder River. The village holds Northern Cheyenne families, with some Oglala lodges present. Snow is hard crust. Breath shows at rifle muzzles. Couriers in the camps are cut off by the initial rush. Company guidons rise in the dim light, and firing starts at close range. Soldiers overrun lodges and seize ponies. Charred lodge poles and scattered parfleches mark the burning. By late morning, the command pulls back to a ridge position to cover its prisoners and herd. The weather turns against both sides. Wind pushes snow across the flats. As the column retires toward the south, it loses control of a large part of the captured herd. Northern Cheyenne riders using the coulees and cutbanks flow to the rear of the moving column and drive ponies off in waves. The immediate effect is mobility restored to the village, yet supplies and shelter are reduced by fire. Word spreads fast. Runners move to Oglala and Mini-Conjou circles on Tongue River and to Allied lodges along Rosebud Creek. The message is brief. The Army will strike in winter and will take horses first. The response is practical. Camps disperse, wider scouts post on ridge crests at dawn and dusk, and cartridges are rationed for close work. Reynolds reaches Crook with a battered column and a diminished herd. The incident hardens will on both sides. For the Army command, it proves winter movement is possible. For the Northern Cheyenne and Oglala, it proves that a column stretched over broken ground can be cut behind and forced to give back what it seized. June 17, 1876, Rosebud Creek. The weather is clear and warm. Grass is good on the benches above the stream. George Crook's column advances north from Goose Creek, with Crow and Shoshonean scouts in the lead and infantry feeling along the ridge spurs. Ahead, Lakota and Northern Cheyenne leaders pull mounted groups onto the fingers that reach toward the valley floor. Oglala, under Crazy Horse, ride close to the broken shoulders, pointing men into the notches that overlook the line of march. The first volleys open near a low divide. Echo answers up and down the folds. The fight spreads over miles of intertwined ridges. Each time Crook pushes a company onto higher ground, mounted groups appear on the flank and then behind, firing from the cover of sage and rock. Dust pillars mark sudden concentrations, then thin out as riders shift laterally to the next draw. Signals are by hand, by calls, and by the motion of small flags stitched to lances. The Army uses bugle calls to extend and contract its skirmish lines. Intervals open and close across the slope. By midday, both sides understand the shape of the field. The Rosebud is a corridor cut by side coulees. Whoever holds the side doors controls whether a line can retire cleanly. Late in the afternoon, Crook's command holds key ridges but cannot turn the opposition. Ammunition wagons behind the column move slowly, and water points are fought over in brief rushes and withdrawals. Lakota and Northern Cheyenne groups aim at the same target all day the road back. They do not try to overrun the main line head-on. They try to sit in the saddles behind it. The effect is cumulative. By evening, Crook breaks contact and withdraws toward Goose Creek to refit. Lakota and Northern Cheyenne riders do not attempt a night pursuit. Families and herds remain farther up the Rosebud and Tongue valleys, and the day's work has met its aim. The column will not reach those camps. Pressure now shifts to the next column moving from the east. June 18th to June 21st, 1876 Yellowstone Line. Telegraphs tap in the field headquarters. Alfred Terry receives news in pieces. Crook's halt and withdrawal after the Rosebud fight are not fully known to the east in time to reset a full junction. High water delays John Gibbons ferrying and bridging along the Yellowstone and Bighorn. Steamboats fight current and driftwood. Messages that might have taken hours in winter posts now take days along a swollen river with breaks in wire. Scouts on the indigenous side operate without telegraph. They ride from the Tongue to the Little Bighorn divide and carry reports by memory, dust columns, wagon counts, and the white gleam of tents glimpsed from high points at dawn. Interpreters in both camps filter and compress what they hear. Some names pass between languages with effort. The aggregate effect is a time lag that favors whoever chooses the ground first. Inside the Allied camps, circles meet at night. Bands decide where to graze the herds and where to post pickets. Ammunition is checked. Powder and lead are finite and are kept for close ranges where shots count. The weather is stable and hot. Horses drink often. On the Army side, orders concentrate on finding and fixing the village. On the camp side, resolve concentrates on closing the roads behind any soldiers who show on the ridges. June 22, 1876, Lower Yellowstone. Terry writes orders for the 7th Cavalry. The intent is clear. Move light, follow the trail up the Rosebud turn toward the Little Bighorn if the path runs that way, and strike when found. The language acknowledges what no paper can control once the column rides into the broken country. You will proceed up the Rosebud until you ascertain definitely the direction in which the trail leads. If it is found to have turned toward the Little Bighorn, you will follow it, and if the village is there, you will attack it. Alfred Terry Field, order, camp. At mouth of Rosebud River, 22 June 1876. Return to the field. June 23rd to June 24th. Divide between Rosebud and Little Bighorn. The 7th Cavalry moves fast along the ridges, leaving the slower elements to follow. Crow and Arikara scouts range wide on the shoulders and drop into the draws to read the ground. Sign is heavy. Lodgepole drags mark recent movement. Older fires lie cold alongside streams. Weather is hot with high, thin haze. Dust plumes betray the regiment's progress to any watcher on the high points. Messages to Gibbon cannot move faster than couriers can ride down to the Yellowstone and back up again. This is a gap measured in days. In the Allied camps, scouts ride in from the south and bring word that bluecoats are on the divide. Women move lodges and children across the river bends to fresh ground. Horse guards pull the herds to safer benches. Warriors paint and saddle and gather by circles, waiting for the first solid report of where the soldiers show on the bluffs above the loops or down in the valley. Small skirmishes flare at long range as scouts test each other and fall back to report. The pressure ratchets one click tighter. The Army must act before the village breaks away. The village prefers to let the Army step into terrain that turns speed into hazard. Signals and delays now matter as much as numbers. A courier's hour gained or lost on either side may decide who reaches a saddle first and who finds an exit taken when they try to use it. By nightfall on June 24th, the northern sky holds heat lightning beyond the ridges. River bottoms run dark. Horses stand tied and doze. In the Army bivouac, orders are spoken low along company streets. Men take off boots and sleep by their saddles. Carbines rest loaded. On the other side of the divide, the camps settle with pickets out and horses close. The season favors movement, the weather favors dust, and the ground favors whoever holds the outlets at first light. The next day, the campaign that began with a winter strike on Powder River and a summer fight on the Rosebud will run to its hardest test. Roads that have been probed and threatened will be closed for real if the mounted groups get to the saddles first. Signals will be arm in hand, and dust and delays will be counted in minutes. June 25, 1876, Little Bighorn Country. The 7th Cavalry rides as a light column under Alfred Terry's theater plan, with John Gibbons' infantry and cavalry moving from the Yellowstone to block escape to the north and west. The regiment's order of battle is simple in outline. George Custer commands. Major Marcus Reno leads 3 companies as the advance battalion. Captain Frederick Benteen leads 3 companies on a left sweep. Custer retains 5 companies in the right wing. The pack train under Captain Thomas McDougall trails with reserve ammunition. Crow and Arikara scouts ride ahead and on the flanks. Against them stands a combined village of Hunkpapa, Oglala, Miniconjou, Sans Arc, Blackfeet, Northern Cheyenne, and a small Arapaho presence with Crazy Horse among the Oglala fighting leaders and other named leaders present in their circles. The camp runs for more than a mile along the river bends with horse herds on the benches and pickets set on the high points. The rules of action are fixed by paper already written. 2 days earlier, Alfred Terry's field order set scope and intent in one line: if the village is there, you will attack it. The broader legal frame issued in Washington the prior winter treated non-agency bands who had not reported by the January deadline as hostile. On the ground, those words translate into movement. Custer divides his command near the divide, dives hard to the bluffs, and chooses speed over full reunion with Gibbon. He means to fix the village and strike before it scatters. First contact opens on the south. Reno crosses to the valley under dust and heat, deploys into a skirmish line and advances. Non-combatants move, first women pull lodges down. Children drive ponies across the river bends, and family groups stream toward the far timber and coulees. Lakota and Cheyenne mounted parties flood the front, in loose order not to stand in long lines, but to work to the edges. Reno's men fight on foot, then pull to the timber under growing pressure. When they remount and run for the bluffs, they are chased hard through the water and up the slope. The immediate humanitarian result is mixed. The village avoids a direct charge into the center. The flight of the non-combatants turns the valley into a moving obstacle for both sides. The soldiers who fall behind at the river are killed. Survivors reach high ground and dig in. North of them, the decisive maneuvers develop. Custer rides a broken crest line toward the river's loops with 5 companies. The terrain is a lattice of knobs and saddles. Every saddle is a door. The tactical pattern that Crazy Horse and other riders used at Rosebud appears again. They race for the doors behind the moving troops. Dust hides numbers. Small groups disappear into side draws and reappear on the next rise to the rear. Fire control is tight. Shots are saved for close ranges where the carbine's edge narrows. The regimental split magnifies the danger. With Reno fixed and Benteen far to the left on his sweep, the right wing has no clean road back once the outlets are taken. Maneuver compresses into minutes on 2 axes. Along the bluffs, companies attempt to gain better ground while keeping a link to the river for water and a retreat line. On the flats and low ridges, mounted parties strike at the ends of short skirmish lines and then slide behind them. Reports from Lakota and Cheyenne participants use the same verbs again and again: cut off, get behind, close the road. Army witnesses on the Reno-Benteen Hill speak in terms of effect, loss of contact, heavy fire to the right front, large dust clouds, and then silence where Custer had been. Casualties on the Custer wing are total. About 210 men die on the Northern Battalion's ground. Across the regiment, the day's dead will tally to 268, with around 55 wounded numbers reported in official returns and later consolidated in War Department summaries. Indigenous losses are recorded unevenly and remain in ranges. Many modern works accept rough figures of 30 to 60 killed, and higher numbers wounded with estimates varying by source and band. Water, ammunition, and horse strength become the logistics story on the bluffs where Reno and Benteen consolidate. The pack train finally arrives, and the boxes of carbine ammunition matter. Heat pushes men to crawl at risk for water from the river under covering fire. Horse casualties run high. Carcasses later serve as imperfect breastworks. Through the night of June 25th to June 26th, sporadic firing continues. At dawn on June 26th, pressure resumes until late in the morning, when the approach of Terry and Gibbon begins to register. In the camp, the decision is made to move. The village has survived the first strike, destroyed one wing of the regiment, and inflicted loss on the other. But it cannot stand under artillery, and infantry wait for another day on that ground, with families and herds. Movement, not static victory, remains its logic. Lodges go down, trails lead out. That afternoon, Terry reaches the field and understands by inspection what the northern wing suffered. His after-action language is dry. Companies found on the ground where they fought, none left alive. Gibbon's infantry patrol the valley. The humanitarian count is recorded in the debris, dead troopers, dead horses, scattered equipment, and the still-moving columns of non-combatants now far up the draws. No mass capture of families occurs. The village has kept its mobility. The campaign turns with the season. Late summer into early autumn brings a different kind of pressure. At Slim Buttes in early September 1876, George Crook strikes a small village and recovers food and goods. The immediate effect on non-combatants is severe. Loss of dried meat and shelter in September is a winter sentence. The action shows that a column can raid deep and then live off captured stores to extend its march. It is a logistics signal as much as a tactical one. The Army has learned to carry less and take more. Through autumn 1876, orders tighten. Departments coordinate to keep columns in the field, and winter pursuit is no longer a threat on paper only. In early January 1807, Nelson Miles moves from the Yellowstone corridor and presses south in brutal cold. On January 8th, at Wolf Mountain, the Oglala and Northern Cheyenne meet him on high ground above Tongue River. The fight is measured in range and minutes as much as in casualties. Indigenous units delay to keep a road open north while families move. Miles brings infantry with steady fire and light artillery that punishes any stand in the open. Ammunition on the indigenous side is conserved, horses are winded by deep snow, and the air itself is an enemy. By afternoon, Crazy Horse withdraws in order. The tactical aim is achieved for the day, but the operational message is plain. The Army can now fight and supply on a winter tableland. The cost of keeping roads open has crossed a threshold. Two short documents frame this turn. In an after-action summary from the Yellowstone line, Miles writes of steady pressure in severe weather and of no respite to the roving bands in winter, a phrase that marks a shift from seasonal to year-round enforcement. Months earlier, Terry's own field instruction had given the tactical cue to attack. Together, they define the edges of authority and practice legal designation of hostility. After January orders to strike when found, and the emergent doctrine of winter pursuit that neutralizes the seasonal refuge mobile villages once held. Casualty and conduct claims from these months carry a small set of fact versus folklore disputes that a clear script should mark. First, the personal placement of Crazy Horse at specific minutes in the Northern Battalion's destruction is described in different ways by participants and later hearsay. Some accounts place him leading a charge at a named point. Others simply note his presence directing riders to the flanks and saddles. The safe statement is that Oglala and Cheyenne leaders, including Crazy Horse, executed a closing maneuver on multiple outlets. The exact individual spear point at each moment remains debated. Second counts of indigenous dead at Little Bighorn vary widely across oral and Army sources. Modern syntheses treat ranges as honest estimates and reject precise tallies unless tied to named lists. Humanitarian outcomes run on two tracks. In June, the village protects its families by moving early and fast, absorbing the shock without mass capture. In September, a small village loses the stores that keep children and elders alive in winter. By January, deep cold burns through herds and people, and the drive toward agencies becomes a calculation of survival. Logistics underwrite every scene. Grass length is mileage for herds. Powder and lead are the slope of a fight. On the Army side, ammunition wagons and steamboat resupply on the Yellowstone extend endurance. On the camp side, each lost cache shortens the season. By early May 1807, the converging pressures close. Messages from relatives at agencies promise food and safety. The horse herds are reduced and powder stores are low. Crazy Horse brings his people into the Red Cloud Agency region and then to Camp Robinson, where he surrenders on May 6th to May 7th. The campaign that began with a winter deadline and a summer collision ends in a ledger entry at a post not on an open ridge. The soldiers' roads of escape had been closed in June by riders who took the exits. By the next winter, the state had learned to close the long roads instead, the river lines, the depots, and the seasons themselves. January 8, 1807, Wolf Mountain, above Tongue River. The sky is iron, the wind is a blade, and powder burns slow in the cold. On one side stand Oglala and Northern Cheyenne circles with Crazy Horse among the Oglala fighting leaders, their objective to hold high ground long enough for families and herds to move north and east to safer benches. On the other side advances Nelson Miles with mixed infantry cavalry and light artillery under winter pursuit orders that now extend enforcement through the season. Ammunition on the indigenous side is rationed to close range. Rations themselves are thin after autumn raids that burned meat stores and seized flour. Pony strength is reduced by deep snow and hard forage. The Army's constraint is exposure on an elevated tableland, but it compensates with steady infantry fire, disciplined intervals and guns, whose shrapnel punishes any stand in the open. The first bursts are probing volleys along broken lips of ground. Miles presses with short advances and holds his men tight to cover. Oglala and Cheyenne groups strike flanks when they can, and then slide back into gullies to conserve cartridges. The immediate effect is a controlled delay. For hours, the road remains open behind Crazy Horse's fighting line, and families keep moving. By afternoon, the weight of steady fire and the cold itself begin to decide the field. The indigenous line withdraws in order. It is not a rout, it is an equation. Each minute traded keeps people alive, but each cartridge spent and each exhausted horse shortens the season to come. Initiative shifts in that moment from a summer pattern where mounted groups close the soldiers' exits to a winter pattern, where columns can now close the long roads that sustain mobile camps. Two documents bracket this turn. The winter designation of non-agency bands as hostile after the January 31, 1876 deadline gave legal cover for sustained operations. Terry's field order of June 22, 1806 that authorized immediate attack, and Miles's winter reports that stressed no respite operations, together hardened practice into doctrine. The battlefield at Wolf Mountain translates the policy into weather, food, and horses. Winter pursuit turns structural advantage toward the side, with depots on the river's steamboats, under spring thaw, and ammunition that arrives in boxes rather than in pouches counted by families. The human cost runs through named ground. Slim Buttes in September removes dried meat and blankets that should have bridged the cold months. Children and elders feel that subtraction first. Winter counts later mark this span with glyphs of captured stores, hard snow, and the long path to surrender, a sequence that moves from Rosebud victory to Little Bighorn, destruction of a battalion, to the hungry winter. Individual names fix the ledger. At Little Bighorn, the northern wing of the 7th Cavalry dies where it stands, officers and enlisted alike, leaving families to bury in July heat. Among the Allied camps, losses at Little Bighorn run in ranges and include Northern Cheyenne and Lakota dead, whose names pass in family memory rather than in official returns. The path of displacement after Slim Buttes and Wolf Mountain leads to Red Cloud Agency and Camp Robinson, where Crazy Horse brings his people in early May 1877. Estoy 77. One admission against interest speaks to the scale of June's disaster that shaped the winter that followed. There were no survivors of the detachment with Custer. Alfred Terry Official Report, Little Bighorn Valley, 7 June 1876. From that acknowledgement flows a chain of decisions. The Army keeps columns afield, learns to raid stores, and trains its logistics into the weather. The Allied camps, having closed every tactical exit in June, face the slow closure of strategic exits over autumn and winter. The Buffalo Range shrinking meat caches seized and pony herds worn down. Powder and lead are not abstract constraints. They are the slope of each day's choices. On January 8th, the slope tilts the wrong way. After Wolf Mountain, Crazy Horse still chooses the road out for his people when he can, but the curve is bending toward surrender. A brief evidence-based counterfactual helps isolate the fulcrum without speculation beyond the record. If Miles had lacked the logistics to keep mixed arms on a high tableland in deep cold, no steady ammunition flow, no shelter, no mounted strength to press after contact, the northern road might have stayed open long enough for a spring regrouping and renewed mobility. If Crook halted after Rosebud had been able to coordinate a junction in late June, before Little Bighorn, pressure might have fallen earlier on the village and forced dispersion before the decisive closing of exits in June. In both lines, the constant is structure depots, transports, and season dictate whether tactical success can be converted into operational decision. Names and routes close the account. Crazy Horse surrenders at Camp Robinson on May 6th to May 7th, 1877, after bringing his people in from the northern country under promises of safety and rations. The displacement path runs from Tongue River and Rosebud benches to agency lines, an arc marked in winter counts by the loss of horses and by hunger. For the Army casualty lists from June remain the heaviest single-day entries of the campaign, a ledger that anchors why winter enforcement follows with such persistence. For the camps, the cost is measured in empty meat racks, worn-out ponies, and new lines of dependence. Synthesis brings us back to the deeper causes set in motion before any shot was fired. Gold strikes in the Black Hills breached a treaty boundary and generated political momentum that the Interior Department could not contain. The January Essex Order created a legal frame that turned absence from agencies into hostility and made winter itself a weapon. Rail and river networks pushed supply farther and faster on the United States side, while Buffalo decline and agency failures compressed options for mobile families. In June, Crazy Horse and Allied leaders used ground speed and fire control to close the soldiers' roads of escape. In January, the state used policy depots and winter columns to close the long roads that had sustained those same families for generations. The turning point is not a single volley at Wolf Mountain or a single raid at Slim Buttes. It is the moment when weather and logistics change sides, when strategic exits narrow until they end at a post-ledger ration window and a date in early May. May 1867, Camp Robinson and Red Cloud Agency. After surrender, Crazy Horse's following is counted, issued temporary rations, and assigned to agency control under the War Department's escort. Agency clerks copy names into new ledgers. Post surgeons record measles and whooping cough among children that spring. The legal frame is already shifting. In August and September, Army and Indian Affairs officials tighten movement rules, order disarmament of men who leave agency lines, and require interpreter-witnessed passes for any travel to hunt along White River or to visit relatives at Spotted Tail. Those orders foreshadow the wider statute that will follow. In February 1807, Congress confirms a new agreement commonly called the Sioux Agreement of 1807, which takes the Black Hills into United States ownership, narrows hunting rights, and fixes agency dependence to scheduled annuity issues. The record appears in the statutes at large and in the annual report of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for 1807, where ration tables and issue days stand beside notices of arrests for absence without permit. Late 1807, Pine Ridge and the White River Valley. Oglala Lakota. Oyate settle into a cycle of ration days, livestock issues, and school placements. Carlisle Indian Industrial School opens that same year in Pennsylvania, and by the early 1880s, enrollment registers list Lakota and Northern Cheyenne names sent east under agency agreements signed by headmen and agents. The school's printed annual reports describe curriculum trades and returns to agency farms. The reservation boundary is defined by survey, then adjusted by the 1889 Sioux Act, which subdivides the Great Sioux Reservation into separate reservations and opens large tracts to homestead. The legal steps can be followed through the text of the 1877 Agreement, the 1889 Act, and the Indian Affairs annual reports in the 1880s, which list allotment preparations, fencing plans, and the number of pupils in on-reservation day schools. Land and resource pressure arrives by survey stake and rail spur. After the 1807 Agreement, federal leasing of former treaty lands in the Black Hills expands gold and timber extraction. Forest Service reports will later describe cut volumes by board feet, while interior files track grazing leases on reservation edges. Northern Pacific and other lines push branches along the Yellowstone and into the Powder River Basin. By the late 1880s, shipping tables and railroad annuals show cattle moving from agency herds to market a program Indian Affairs frames as civilization through stock raising. The Pine Ridge Agency Farmers Reports document acreage under oats and corn, issue of plows and wagons, and the construction of agency mills. For Northern Cheyenne, a permanent homeland is recognized in 1884 on Tongue River. Agency correspondence from Tongue River details the first fencing the ration roll and conflicts with non-Indian stockmen over water and grass. Demography and health pass through ledgers before they pass through memory. Red Cloud Agency census rolls for 1817 and Pine Ridge Agency rolls of the 1880s show a compressed population under tighter control. Physician reports note outbreaks of measles, smallpox vaccination pains, and infant mortality rates that rise in bad winters. After the 1880-1882 Buffalo collapse, food security depends on freight schedules and issue days rather than on hunts. The 1883 Indian Affairs Report prints comparative tables of rations by agency and the number of able-bodied men on agency work crews. These are the bureaucratic traces of a larger shift. The people who closed exits at Rosebud and Little Bighorn are now managed by ledger line issue ticket and school roster. Cultural continuance persists inside those constraints. Ceremonies are pressed, permitted, or surveilled according to policy mood. In the 1880s, agents circulate circulars against large gatherings, then later file cautiously worded notes about harvest dances or feasts with named chiefs attending. Language endures in family camps and in winter storytelling, even as mission schools teach English primers and penmanship. Seasonal movements shrink to short permitted hunts, timber cutting, and haying under agency contracts. Yet winter counts keep marking years in glyphs that fix memory to event rather than to statute. The Cloud Shield, winter count copied by ethnographers in the late 19th century, marks 1876 with figures for the Custer fight, and 1807 with signs of cold hunger and surrender. American Horse and other keepers record similar motifs reinforcing community chronology against the administrative calendar. Ledger art continues the same work in color and line. Red Horse's drawings of Little Bighorn, recorded by a United States Army doctor in 1881, show the closing motion on the bluffs as the artist remembered and taught it a military lesson drawn for paper instead of sand. Arrests, transfers, and legal pressure punctuate the years after surrender. Crazy Horse dies in Army custody at Camp Robinson in September 1807. The post's monthly return and the testimony of interpreters and officers form the core of the official record. In 1878 and 1879, Northern Cheyenne families who attempt to return north from Indian Territory appear in Army and press accounts. The War Department's correspondence volumes track the pursuit and the legal dilemma of people moving toward a homeland not yet recognized in law. By 1884, with the Tongue River Reservation secured, agency orders stabilize and annuity registers begin to show steady seasonal issues. Allotment arrives as policy with the 1887 General Allotment Act. Although the largest partitioning for the Lakota follows the 1889 Sioux Act, Pine Ridge's allotment schedules and plat books from the early 1890s show parcels assigned to households with trust restrictions and patent dates recorded in ink. The Indian Affairs Report's print acreage allotted the number of patents issued and the acres leased under the grazing program to non-Indian ranchers. For families' allotment rearranges daily life, fences need posts, wells need to be sunk, and distant relatives now live across survey miles instead of across a shared camp circle. Mortality and birth under these new conditions show in missionary and agency records alike. Mission hospitals and agency physicians record measles waves in the early 1880s, a severe influenza season in the 1890s, and gradual increases in live births reported to the agency clerk as midwives and missionaries adapt to new reporting rules. Census tables in the 1890 and 1900 Indian census volumes provide the countable edge of a lived demographic change. Memory organizes continuance. Community commemorations at Little Bighorn from the early 20th century onward bring Lakota and Northern Cheyenne families to the Bluffs. National Park Service administrative histories note the addition of markers for Native combatants and the recording of oral histories on site. On Pine Ridge, community events tie military memory to cultural programs, language classes, veteran ceremonies, and youth horse programs run by local organizations. Northern Cheyenne Memorial runs Trace the Return route of 1878 to 1879 and Fixed Place to Story each year. Ethnographic notes, park management plans, and tribal historic preservation office filings serve as the printed trail of this memory work. Present day, the Oglala Lakota Oyate live primarily on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. The Tsitsistas Northern Cheyenne live on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana. Tribal governments administer education, health, and historic preservation programs. Oglala Lakota College and Chief Dull Knife College appear in federal education directories as tribal colleges that sustain language and history. Lakota language revitalization initiatives documented by program grants and curriculum guides run immersion classrooms and community courses. Legal continuance includes the Long Black Hills litigation with United States v. Sioux Nation, decided in 1980 and trust funds recorded in Court of Claims ledgers. Tribal resolutions and public statements continue to frame that award as compensation refused in preference for land discussion. Tribal Historic Preservation Offices file Section 106 consultations on infrastructure and resource projects that cross ancestral lands records kept in agency and state archives. 5 records anchor this prose. The annual reports of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for 1807 through the 1880s, print ration issues, school enrollments, and agency health notes. The statutes at large carry the text of the 1807 Sioux Agreement, the 1887 General Allotment Act, and the 1889 Sioux Act that partitioned the Great Sioux Reservation. Carlisle Indian Industrial School annual reports list names and trades for Lakota and Cheyenne students and note returns to agency farms. Pine Ridge and Tongue River agency census rolls and physicians' reports document population and disease. Winter counts recorded by Cloud Shield and American Horse and the Red Horse Ledger. Drawings preserve the community chronology and the tactical memory of June 1876. Together, those records describe how a people who once closed every road of escape adapted when the state closed the long roads instead, and how law, land, schools, and memory have shaped continuance from 1818-7 to the present. In the long view, historians converge on 3 points. First, Crazy Horse and allied Lakota and Northern Cheyenne used a coherent operational method on open ground. Fix a column frontally ride, the flanks seize the outlets and force the enemy to fight where he cannot disengage. Rosebud proves the pattern. Little Bighorn shows its maximum effect. Second, the United States adapted within months by converting policy into logistics. Slim Butte's Winter Pursuit and Wolf Mountain demonstrate that depots, river transport, and mixed arms in severe weather could close the long roads that sustained mobile villages. Third, sovereignty pressure outlived the battles. The 1807 Agreement, the 1889 Act allotment, and school regimes shifted the struggle from ridgelines to ledgers, but the historical arc remains one system learning to move faster, while the other preserved culture inside narrowing space. Disputes are specific and durable. Indigenous casualty numbers at Little Bighorn are recorded unevenly. Careful syntheses keep ranges rather than hard totals. The exact placement of Crazy Horse at particular minutes in the Northern Battalion's destruction comes through overlapping testimonies, some direct and some decades later. The safe claim is leadership in a multi-axis closing motion, not a single decisive charge. Analysts divide on whether Rosebud alone halted Crook, or whether his withdrawal was a prudent regrouping that still left the converging plan intact. Others debate whether Wolf Mountain was a decisive battlefield turn, or the visible crest of cumulative winter attrition. On surrender motives, sources balance material facts, powder forage, and family survival against pressures inside and between agencies. The consensus treats the decision as strategic necessity rather than a change of allegiance. The legacy crosses doctrine, reform, and symbol. For the Army, these months validated winter campaigning, closer integration of scouts, ammunition, discipline, and the hard lesson that tactical division without secure exits courts disaster. For Lakota and Northern Cheyenne memory, winter counts and ledger art became durable archives, fixing dates, places, and the closing motion on the bluffs into community time. In public history, battlefield interpretation has widened to include indigenous planning and terrain reading, alongside cavalry narratives and claims over the Black Hills remain a living legal chapter that ties strategy to land. In teaching and training alike, the case remains a paired caution. Intelligent use of ground can defeat a larger force in summer, and intelligent use of supply can defeat a mobile society in winter. This episode endures because it shows with names and dates how mastery of terrain and mastery of logistics, one closing exits in June, the other closing seasons by January, decided the fate of both a regiment and a people. We've aligned dates, maps, and testimony to see why the exits closed. What remains most contested to you, casualty figures, individual roles, or the real impact of the treaty, share below. Thanks for watching.